Chapter 38 of To Have and to Hold by Mary Johnston. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Tom Weiss. Chapter 38 in which I go upon a quest. Through a loophole in the gate of the palisade I looked, and saw the sandy neck joining the town to the main, and the deep and dark woods beyond, the fairy mantle giving invisibility to a host. Between us and that refuge dead men lay here and there, stiff and stark, with the black paint upon them, and the colored feathers of their headdresses red or blue against the sand. One warrior, shot through the back, crawled like a wounded beetle to the forest. We let him go, for we cared not to waste ammunition upon him. I drew back from my loophole and held out my hand to the women for a freshly loaded musket. A quick murmur like the drawing of a breath came from our line. The Governor, standing near me, cast an anxious glance along the stretch of wooden stakes that were neither so high nor so thick as they should have been. "I am new to this warfare, Captain Percy," he said. "Do they think to use those logs that they carry as battering rams?" "As scaling ladders, your Honor," I replied. "It is on the cards that we may have some sword play, after all." "We'll take your advice the next time we build a palisade, Ralph Percy," muttered West on my other side. Mounting the breastwork that we had thrown up to shelter the women who were to load the muskets, he coolly looked over the pales at the oncoming savages. "Wait until they pass that blasted pine, men," he cried. "Then give them a hail of lead that will beat them back to Pamunkey." An arrow whistled by his ear. A second struck him on the shoulder, but pierced not his coat of mail. He came down from his dangerous post with a laugh. "If the leader could be picked off," I said. "It's a long shot, but there's no harm in trying." As I spoke I raised my gun to my shoulder, but he leaned across Rolfe, who stood between us, and plucked me by the sleeve. "You've not looked at him closely. Look again." I did as he told me, and lowered my musket. It was not for me to send that Indian leader to his account. Rolfe's lips tightened, and a sudden pallor overspread his face. "Nantauquas?" he muttered in my ear, and I nodded yes. The volley that we fired full into the ranks of our foe was deadly, and we looked to see them turn and flee as they had fled before. But this time they were led by one who had been trained in English steadfastness. Broken for the moment, they rallied and came on yelling, bearing logs, thick branches of trees, oars tied together, anything by whose help they could hope to surmount the palisade. We fired again, but they had planted their ladders. Before we could snatch the loaded muskets from the women, a dozen painted figures appeared above the sharpened stakes. A moment, and they and a score behind them had leaped down upon us. It was no time now to skulk behind a palisade. At all hazards that tide from the forest must be stemmed. Those that were among us we might kill, but more were swarming after them, and from the neck came the exultant yelling of madly hurrying reinforcements. We flung open the gates. I drove my sword through the heart of an Indian who would have opposed me, and calling for men to follow me, sprang forward. Perhaps 30 came at my call. Together we made for the opening. A party of the savages in our midst interposed. We set upon them with sword and musket butt, and though they fought like very devils, drove them before us through the gateway. Behind us were wild clamor, the shrieking of women, the stern shouts of the English, the whooping of the savages. Before us a rush that must be met and turned. It was done. A moment's fierce fighting, then the Indians wavered, broke, and fled. Like sheep we drove them before us, across the neck, to the edge of the forest, into which they plunged. Into that ambush we cared not to follow, but fell back to the palisade and the town, believing, and with reason, that the lesson had been taught. The strip of sand was strewn with the dead and the dying, but they belonged not to us. Our dead numbered but 3, and we bore their bodies with us. Within the palisade we found the English in sufficiently good case. Of the score or more Indians cut off by us from their mates and penned within that death trap, half at least were already dead, run through with sword and pike, shot down with muskets that there was now time to load. The remainder, hemmed about, pressed against the wall, were fast meeting with a like fate. They stood no chance against us. We cared not to make prisoners of them. It was a slaughter, but they had taken the initiative. They fought with the courage of despair, striving to spring in upon us, striking when they could with hatchet and knife, and through it all talking and laughing, making God knows what savage boasts, what taunts against the English, what references to the hunting grounds to which they were going. They were brave men that we slew that day. At last there was left but the leader, unharmed, unwounded, though time and again he had striven to close with some one of us, to strike and to die, striking with his fellows. Behind him was the wall. Of the half circle which he faced well nigh, all were old soldiers and servants of the colony, gentlemen none of whom had come in later than Dale, Rolfe, West, Wynne, and others. We were swordsmen all. When in his desperation he would have thrown himself upon us, we contented ourselves with keeping him at sword's length, and at last West sent the knife in the dark hand whirling over the palisade. Some one had shouted to the musketeers to spare him. When he saw that he stood alone, he stepped back against the wall, drew himself up to his full height, and folded his arms. Perhaps he thought that we would shoot him down then and there. Perhaps he saw himself a captive amongst us, a show for the idle and for the strangers that the ships brought in. The din had ceased, and we the living, the victors, stood and looked at the vanquished dead at our feet, and at the dead beyond the gates, and at the neck upon which was no living foe, and at the blue sky bending over all. Our hearts told us, and told us truly, that the lesson had been taught, that no more forever need we at Jamestown fear an Indian attack. And then we looked at him whose life we had spared. He opposed our gaze with his folded arms and his head held high, and his back against the wall. Many of us could remember him, a proud, shy lad, coming for the first time from the forest with his sister to see the English village and its wonders. For idleness we had sent him in our midst that summer day long ago on the green by the fort, and had called him "Your Royal Highness," laughing at the quickness of our wit, and admiring the spirit and bearing of the lad and the promise he gave of a splendid manhood. And all knew the tale I had brought the night before. Slowly as one man, and with no spoken word, we fell back, the half circle straightening into a line and leaving a clear pathway to the open gates. The wind had ceased to blow, I remember, and a sunny stillness lay upon the sand and the rough-hewn wooden stakes, and a little patch of tender grass across which stretched a dead man's arm. The church bells began to ring. The Indian out of whose path to life and freedom we had stepped glanced from the line of lowered steel to the open gates and the forest beyond, and understood. For a full minute he waited, moving not a muscle, still and stately as some noble masterpiece in bronze. Then he stepped from the shadow of the wall and moved past us through the sunshine that turned the eagle feather in his scalp lock to gold. His eyes were fixed upon the forest. There was no change in the superb calm of his face. He went by the huddled dead and the long line of the living that spoke no word, and out of the gates and across the neck, walking slowly that we might yet shoot him down if we saw fit to repent ourselves, and proudly, like a king's son. There was no sound save the church bells ringing for our deliverance. He reached the shadow of the trees, a moment, and the forest had back her own. We sheathed our swords and listened to the Governor's few earnest words of thankfulness and of recognition of this or that man's service, and then we set to work to clear the ground of the dead, to place sentinels, to bring the town into order, to determine what policy we should pursue, to search for ways by which we might reach and aid those who might be yet alive in the plantations above and below us. We could not go through the forest where every tree might hide a foe, but there was the river. For the most part the houses of the English had been built, like mine at Weyanoke, very near to the water. I volunteered to lead a party up river, and Wynne to go with another toward the bay. But as the council at the Governor's was breaking up, and as Wynne and I were hurrying off to make our choice of the craft at the landing, there came a great noise from the watchers upon the bank, and a cry that boats were coming down the stream. It was so, and there were in them white men, nearly all of whom had their wounds to show, and cowering women and children. One boat had come from the plantation at Paspahegh, and two from Martin Brandon. They held all that were left of the people. A woman had in her lap the body of a child, and would not let us take it from her. Another, with a half-severed arm, crouched above a man who lay in his blood in the bottom of the boat. Thus began that strange procession that lasted throughout the afternoon and night and into the next day, when a sloop came down from Henricus with the news that the English were in force there to stand their ground, although their loss had been heavy. Hour after hour they came as fast as sail and oar could bring them, the panic-stricken folk, whose homes were burned, whose kindred were slain, who had themselves escaped as by a miracle. Many were sorely wounded, so that they died when we lifted them from the boats. Others had slighter hurts. Each boatload had the same tale to tell of treachery, surprise, and fiendish butchery. Wherever it had been possible the English had made a desperate defense, in the face of which the savages gave way and finally retired to the forest. Contrary to their wont, the Indians took few prisoners, but for the most part slew outright those whom they seized, wreaking their spite upon the senseless corpses. A man too good for this world, George Thorpe, who would think no evil, was killed, and his body mutilated by those whom he had taught and loved. And Nathaniel Powell was dead, and 4 others of the council, besides many more of name and note. There were many women slain, and little children. From the stronger hundreds came tidings of the number lost, and that the survivors would hold the homes that were left for the time at least. The Indians had withdrawn. It remained to be seen if they were satisfied with the havoc they had wrought. Would his Honor send by boat? There could be no traveling through the woods, news of how others had fared, and also powder and shot? Before the dawning we had heard from all save the remoter settlements. The blow had been struck, and the hurt was deep. But it was not beyond remedy, thank God. It is known what measures we took for our protection, and how soon the wound to the colony was healed, and what vengeance we meted out to those who had set upon us in the dark and had failed to reach the heart. These things belong to history, and I am not but telling my own story, mine and another's. In the chill and darkness of the hour before dawn, something like quiet fell upon the distracted, breathless town. There was a pause in the coming of the boats. The wounded and the dying had been cared for, and the noise of the women and the children was stilled at last. All was well at the palisade. The strong party encamped upon the neck reported the forest beyond them as still as death. In the Governor's house was held a short council, subdued and quiet, for we were all of one mind and our words were few. It was decided that the George should sail at once with the tidings, and with an appeal for arms and powder and a supply of men. The Esperance would still be with us, besides the Hope in God and the Tiger. The Margaret and John would shortly come in, being already overdue. "My Lord Carnal goes upon the George, gentlemen," said Master Pory. "He sent but now to demand if she sailed to-morrow. He is ill, and would be at home." One or two glanced at me, but I sat with a face like stone, and the Governor, rising, broke up the council. I left the house and the street that was lit with torches and noisy with going to and fro, and went down to the river. Rolfe had been detained by the Governor. West commanded the party at the Neck. There were great fires burning along the river bank, and men watching for the incoming boats. But I knew of a place where no guard was set, and where 1 or 2 canoes were moored. There was no firelight there, and no one saw me when I entered a canoe and cut the rope and pushed off from the land. Well nigh a day and a night had passed since Lady Wyatt had told me that which made for my heart a night time indeed. I believed my wife to be dead. Yea, I trusted that she was dead. I hoped that it had been quickly over, one blow. Better that, oh, better that 1,000 times, than that she should have been carried off to some village, saved to-day to die 1,000 deaths to-morrow. But I thought that there might have been left, lying on the dead leaves of the forest, that fair shell from which the soul had flown. I knew not where to go, to the north, to the east, to the west, but go I must. I had no hope of finding that which I went to seek, and no thought but to take up that quest. I was a soldier, and I had stood to my post. But now the need was past, and I could go. In the hall at the Governor's house I had written a line of farewell to Rolfe, and had given the paper into the hand of a trusty fellow, charging him not to deliver it for 2 hours to come. I rowed 2 miles downstream through the quiet darkness, so quiet after the hubbub of the town. When I turned my boat to the shore the day was close at hand. The stars were gone, and a pale, cold light, more desolate than the dark, streamed from the east, across which ran, like a faded blood-stain, a smear of faint red. Upon the forest the mist lay heavy. When I drove the boat in amongst the sedge and reeds below the bank, I could see only the trunks of the nearest trees, hear only the sullen cry of some river bird that I had disturbed. Why I was at some pains to fasten the boat to a sycamore that dipped a pallid arm into the stream, I do not know. I never thought to come back to the sycamore. I never thought to bend to an oar again, to behold again the river that the trees and the mist hid from me before I had gone 20 yards into the forest. End of chapter 38. Recording by Tom Weiss, tomsaudiobooks.com. Chapter 39, Up to Heaven to Hold by Mary Johnston. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Tom Weiss. Chapter 39, in which we listen to a song. It was like a May morning, so mild was the air, so gay the sunshine, when the mist had risen. Wild flowers were blooming, and here and there unfolding leaves made a delicate fretwork against a deep blue sky. The wind did not blow. Everywhere were stillness soft and sweet, dewy freshness, careless peace. Hour after hour I walked slowly through the woodland, pausing now and then to look from side to side. It was idle going, wandering in a desert with no guiding star. The place where I would be might lie to the east, to the west. In the wide enshrouding forest I might have passed it by. I believed not that I had done so. Surely I should have known. Surely the voice that lived only in my heart would have called to me to stay. Beside a newly felled tree in a glade starred with small white flowers, I came upon the bodies of a man and a boy, so hacked, so hewn, so robbed of all comeliness, that at the sight the heart stood still and the brain grew sick. Farther on was a clearing, and in its midst the charred and blackened walls of what had been a home. I crossed the freshly turned earth, and looked in at the cabin door with the stillness and the sunshine. A woman lay dead upon the floor, her outstretched hand clenched upon the foot of a cradle. I entered the room, and looking within the cradle, found that the babe had not been spared. Taking up the little waxen body with the blood upon its innocent breast, I laid it within the mother's arms, and went my way over the sunny doorstep and the earth that had been made ready for planting. A white butterfly, the first of the year, fluttered before me, then rose through a mist of green and passed from my sight. The sun climbed higher into the deep blue sky. Save where grew pines or cedars, there were no shadowy places in the forest. The slight green of uncurling leaves, the airy scarlet of the maples, the bare branches of the tardier trees, opposed no barrier to the sunlight. It streamed into the world below the tree tops, and lay warm upon the dead leaves and the green moss and the fragile wild flowers. There was a noise of birds, and a fox barked. All was lightness, gaiety, and warmth. The sap was running, the heyday of the spring at hand. Ah, to be riding with her, to be going home through the fairy forest, the sunshine and the singing. The happy miles to Weyanoke, the smell of the sassafras in its woods, the house all lit and trimmed, the fire kindled, the wine upon the table, Diccon's welcoming face, and his hand upon Black Lameral's bridle. The minister, too, maybe, with his great heart, and his kindly eyes, her hand in mine, her head upon my breast. The vision faded. Never, never, never for me a home-coming such as that, so deep, so dear, so sweet. The men who were my friends, the woman whom I loved, had gone into a far country. This world was not their home. They had crossed the threshold, while I lagged behind. The door was shut, and without were the night and I. With the fading of the vision came a sudden consciousness of a presence in the forest other than my own. I turned sharply and saw an Indian walking with me, step for step, but with a space between us of earth and brown tree trunks and drooping branches. For a moment I thought that he was a shadow, not substance. Then I stood still, waiting for him to speak or to draw nearer. At the first glimpse of the bronzed figure I had touched my sword, but when I saw who it was, I let my hand fall. He too paused, but he did not offer to speak. With his hand upon a great bow he waited, motionless in the sunlight. A minute or more thus, then I walked on with my eyes upon him. At once he addressed himself to motion, not speaking or making any sign, or lessening the distance between us, but moving as I moved through the light and shade, the warmth and stillness of the forest. For a time I kept my eyes upon him, but soon I was back with my dreams again. It seemed not worth while to wonder why he walked with me, who was now the mortal foe of the people to whom he had returned. From the river bank, the sycamore, and the boat that I had fastened there, I had gone northward toward the Pamunkey. From the clearing and the ruined cabin with the dead within it, I had turned toward the eastward. Now in that hopeless wandering I would have faced the north again. But the Indian who had made himself my traveling companion stopped short and pointed to the east. I looked at him and thought that he knew maybe of some war party between us and the Pamunkey, and would save me from it. A listlessness had come upon me, and I obeyed the pointing finger. So, estranged and silent, with 2 spears' length of earth between us, we went on until we came to a quiet stream flowing between low, dark banks. Again I would have turned to the northward, but the son of Powhatan, gliding before me, set his face down the stream toward the river I had left. A minute in which I tried to think it could not, because in my ears was the singing of the birds at Weyanoke. Then I followed him. How long I walked in a dream, hand in hand with the sweetness of the past, I do not know. But when the present and its anguish weighed again upon my heart, it was darker, colder, stiller in the forest. The soundless stream was bright no longer. The golden sunshine that had laid upon the earth was all gathered up. The earth was dark and smooth and bare, with not a flower. The tree trunks were many, and straight and tall. Above were no longer brown branch and blue sky, but a deep and somber green, thick woven, keeping out the sunlight like a pall. I stood still and gazed around me, and knew the place. To me, whose heart was haunted, the dismal wood, the charmed silence, the withdrawal of the light, were less than nothing. All day I had looked for one sight of horror, yea, had longed to come at last upon it, to fall beside it, to embrace it with my arms. There, though it should be some fair and sunny spot, there would be my haunted wood. As for this place of gloom and stillness, it fell in with my mood. More welcome than the mocking sunshine were this cold and solemn light, this death-like silence, these ranged pines. It was a place in which to think of life as a slight thing and scarcely worth the while, given without the asking, spent in turmoil, strife, suffering, and longings all in vain. Easily laid down, too, so easily laid down that the wonder was. I looked up at the ghostly wood and at the dull stream, and at my hand upon the hilt of the sword that I had drawn half-way from the scabbard. The life within that hand I had not asked for. Why should I stand like a soldier left to guard a thing not worth the guarding? Seeing his comrades march homeward, hearing a cry to him from his distant hearthstone. I drew my sword well nigh from its sheath, and then of a sudden I saw the matter in a truer light. knew that I was indeed the soldier, and willed to be neither coward nor deserter. The blade dropped back into the scabbard with a clang, and straightening myself, I walked on beside the sluggish stream, deep into the haunted wood. Presently it occurred to me to glance aside at the Indian who had kept pace with me through the forest. He was not there. He walked with me no longer. Save for myself, there seemed to be no breathing creature in the dim wood. I looked to right and left, and saw only the tall straight pines and the needle-strewn ground. How long he had been gone I could not tell. He might have left me when first we came to the pines, for my dreams had held me, and I had not looked his way. There was that in the twilight place, or in the strangeness, the horror and the yearning that had kept company with me that day, or in the dull weariness of a mind and body overwrought of late, which made thought impossible. I went on down the stream toward the river, because it chanced that my face was set in that direction. How dark was the shadow of the pines, how lifeless the earth beneath, how faint and far away the blue that showed here and there through rifts in the heavy wood of foliage. The stream bending to one side I turned with, and there before me stood the minister. I do not know what strangled cry burst from me. The earth was rocking, all the wood a glare of light. As for him, at the sight of me and the sound of my voice, he had staggered back against a tree. But now, recovering himself, he ran to me and put his great arms about me. "From the power of the dog, from the lion's mouth," he cried brokenly. "And they slew thee not, Ralph, the heathen who took thee away. Yesternight I learned that you lived, but I looked not for you here." I scarce heard or marked what he was saying, and found no time in which to wonder at his knowledge that I had not perished. I only saw that he was alone, and that in the evening wood there was no sign of other living creature. "Yea, they slew me not, Jeremy," I said. "I would that they had done so." "And you are alone? I am glad that you died not, my friend. Yes, faith, I am very glad that one escaped. Tell me about it, and I will sit here upon the bank and listen. Was it done in this wood? A gloomy deathbed, friend, for one so young and fair? She should have died to soft music, in the sunshine, with flowers about her." With an exclamation he put me from him, but kept his hand upon my arm and his steady eyes upon my face. "She loved laughter and sunshine and sweet songs," I continued. "She can never know them in this wood. They are outside the world, I think. It is sad, is it not? Faith, I think it is the saddest thing I have ever known." He clapped his other hand upon my shoulder. "Wake, man!" he commanded. "If thou shouldst go mad now, wake! Thy brain is turning. Hold to thyself. Stand fast, as thou art soldier and Christian. Ralph, she is not dead. She will wear flowers, thy flowers, sing, laugh, move through the sunshine of earth for many and many a year, please God. Art listening, Ralph? Canst hear what I am saying?" "I hear," I said at last, "but I do not well understand." He pushed me back against a pine, and held me there with his hands upon my shoulders. "Listen," he said, speaking rapidly and keeping his eyes upon mine. "All those days that you were gone, when all the world declared you dead, she believed you living. She saw party after party come back without you, and she believed that you were left behind in the forest. Also, she knew that the George waited but for the search to be quite given over, and for my Lord Carnal's recovery. She had been told that the King's command might not be defied, that the Governor had no choice but to send her from Virginia. Ralph, I watched her, and I knew that she meant not to go upon that ship. 3 nights agone she stole from the Governor's house, and passing through the gates that the sleeping warder had left unfastened, went toward the forest. I saw her and followed her, and at the edge of the forest I spoke to her. I stayed her not, or I brought her not back, Ralph, because I was convinced that if I did so she should die. I knew of no great danger, and I trusted in the Lord to show me what to do, step by step, and how to guide her gently back when she was weary of wandering, when, worn out, she was willing to give up the quest for the dead. Art following me, Ralph?" "Yes," I answered, and took my hand from my eyes. "I was nigh mad, Jeremy, for my faith was not like hers. I have looked on death too much of late, and yesterday all men believed that he had come to dwell in the forest and had swept clean his house before him. But you escaped. You both escaped." "God's hand was over us," he said reverently. "This is the way of it. She had been ill, you know, and of late she had taken no thought of food or sleep. She was so weak we had to go slowly, and so winding was our path, who knew not the country, that the evening found us not far upon our way, if way we had. We came to a cabin in a clearing, and they whose home it was gave us shelter for the night. In the morning, when the father and son would go forth to their work, we walked with them. When they came to the trees they meant to fell, we bade them good bye and went on alone. We had not gone an 100 paces when, looking back, we saw 3 Indians start from the dimness of the forest and set upon and slay the man and the boy. That murder done, they gave chase to me, who caught up thy wife and ran for both our lives. When I saw that they were light of foot and would overtake me, I set my burden down, and drawing a sword that I had with me, went back to meet them halfway. Ralph, I slew all 3. May the Lord have mercy on my soul. I knew not what to think of that attack, the peace with the Indians being so profound, and I began to fear for thy wife's safety. She knew not the woods, and I managed to turn our steps back towards Jamestown without her knowledge that I did so. It was about midday when we saw the gleam of the river through the trees before us, and heard the sound of firing and of a great yelling. I made her crouch within a thicket, while I myself went forward to reconnoiter, and well nigh stumbled into the midst of an army. Yelling, painted, maddened, brandishing their weapons toward the town, human hair dabbled with blood at the belts of many. In the name of God, Ralph, what is the meaning of it all?" "It means," I said, "that yesterday they rose against us and slew us by the 100. The town was warned and is safe. Go on." "I crept back to madam," he continued, "and hurried her away from that dangerous neighborhood. We found a growth of bushes and hid ourselves within it, and just in time, for from the north came a great band of picked warriors, tall and black and wondrously feathered, fresh to the fray, whatever the fray might be. They joined themselves to the imps upon the river bank, and presently we heard another great din with more firing and more yelling. Well, to make a long story short, we crouched there in the bushes until late afternoon, not knowing what was the matter, and not daring to venture forth to find out. The woman of the cabin at which we had slept had given us a packet of bread and meat, so we were not without food, but the time was long. And then of a sudden from the wood around us was filled with the heathen, band after band, coming from the river, stealing like serpents this way and that into the depths of the forest. They saw us not in the thick bushes. Maybe it was because of the prayers which I said with might and main. At last the distance swallowed them, the forest seemed clear, no sound, no motion. Long we waited, but with the sunset we stole from the bushes and down an aisle of the forest toward the river, rounded a little wood of cedar, and came full upon perhaps 50 of the savages." He paused to draw a great breath, and to raise his brows after a fashion that we had. Go on," I cried. "What did you do? You have said that she is alive and safe?" "She is," he answered, "but no thanks to me, though I did set lustily upon that painted fry. Who led them, do ye think, Ralph? Who saved us from those bloody hands?" A light broke in upon me. "I know," I said. "And he brought you here." "Ay, he sent away the devils whose color he is, worse luck. He told us that there were Indians not of his tribe between us and the town. If we went on we should fall into their hands. But there was a place that was shunned by the Indian as by the white man. We could bide there until the morrow, when we might find the woods clear. He guided us to this dismal wood that was not altogether strange to us. Ay, he told her that you were alive. He said no more than that. All at once, when we were well within the wood, and the twilight was about us, he was gone." He ceased to speak, and stood regarding me with a smile upon his rugged face. I took his hand and raised it to my lips. "I owe you more than I can ever pay," I said. "Where is she, my friend?" "Not far away," he answered. "We sought the center of the wood, and because she was so chilled and weary and shaken, I did dare to build a fire there. Not a foe has come against us, and we waited but for the dusk of this evening to try to make the town. I came down to the stream just now to find, if I could, how near we were to the river." He broke off, made a gesture with his hand toward one of the long aisles of pine trees, and then, with a muttered, "God bless you both," left me, and going a little way down the stream, stood with his back to a great tree and his eyes upon the slow, deep water. She was coming. I watched the slight figure grow out of the dusk between the trees, and the darkness in which I had walked of late fell away. The wood that had been so gloomy was a place of sunlight and song. Had red roses sprung up around me, I had felt no wonder. She came softly and slowly, with bent head and hanging arms, not knowing that I was near. I went not to meet her. It was my fancy to have her come to me still. But when she raised her eyes and saw me, I fell upon my knees. For a moment she stood still, with her hands at her bosom. Then softly and slowly through the dusky wood she came to me and touched me upon the shoulder. "Art come to take me home?" she asked. "I have wept and prayed and waited long, but now the spring is here, and the woods are growing green." I took her hands and bowed my head upon them. "I believed thee dead," I said. "I thought that thou hadst gone home indeed, and I was left in the world alone. I can never tell thee how I love thee." "I need no telling," she answered. "I am glad that I did so forget my womanhood as to come to Virginia on such an errand. Glad that they did laugh at and insult me in the meadow at Jamestown, for else thou mightst have given me no thought. Very heartily glad that thou didst buy me with thy handful of tobacco. With all my heart I love thee, my knight, my lover, my lord, and husband." Her voice broke, and I felt the trembling of her frame. "I love not thy tears upon my hands," she murmured. "I have wandered far, and am weary. Wilt rise and put thy arm around me, and lead me home?" I stood up, and she came to my arms like a tired bird to its nest. I bent my head and kissed her upon the brow, the blue-veined eyelids, the perfect lips. "I love thee," I said. "The song is old, but it is sweet. See, I wear thy color, my lady." The hand that had touched the ribbon upon my arm stole upwards to my lips. "An old song, but a sweet one," she said. "I love thee. I will always love thee. My head may lie upon thy breast, but my heart lies at thy feet." There was joy in the haunted wood, deep peace, quiet thankfulness, a springtime of the heart, not riotous like the May, but fair and grave and tender like the young world in the sunshine without the pines. Our lips met again, and then, with my arm around her, we moved to the giant pine beneath which stood the minister. He turned at our approach, and looked at us with a quiet and tender smile, though the water stood in his eyes. "Heaviness may endure for a night," he said, "but joy cometh in the morning. I thank God for you both." "Last summer in the green meadow we knelt before you while you blessed us, Jeremy," I answered. "Bless us now again, true friend and man of God." He laid his hands upon our bowed heads and blessed us, and then we three moved through the dismal wood and beside the sluggish stream down to the great bright river. Ere we reached it the pines had fallen away, the haunted wood was behind us, our steps were set through a fairy world of greening bough and springing bloom. The blue sky laughed above, the late sunshine bared our path with gold. When we came to the river it lay in silver at our feet, making low music amongst its reeds. I had bethought me of the boat which I had fastened that morning to the sycamore between us and the town, and now we moved along the river bank until we should come to the tree. Though we walked through an enemy's country, we saw no foe. Stillness and peace encompassed us. It was like a beautiful dream from which one fears no wakening. As we went I told them, speaking low, for we knew not if we were yet in safety, of the slaughter that had been made of and of Diccon. My wife shuddered and wept, and the minister drew long breaths while his hands opened and closed. And then, when she asked me, I told of how I had been trapped to the ruined hut that night, and of all that had followed. When I had done, she turned within my arm and clung to me with her face hidden. I kissed her and comforted her, and presently we came to the sycamore tree reaching out over the clear water, and to the boat that I had fastened there. The sunset was nigh at hand, and all the west was pink. The wind had died away, and the river lay like tinted glass between the dark borders of the forest. Above, the sky was blue, while in the south rose clouds that were like pillars, tall and golden. The air was soft as silk. There was no sound other than the ripple of the water about our keel and the low dash of the oars. The minister rowed, while I sat idle beside my love. He would have it so, and I made slight demur. We left the bank behind us and glided into the midstream, for it was as well to be out of arrow shot. The shadow of the forest was gone. Still and bright around us lay the mighty river. When at length the boat head turned out to the west, we saw far up the stream the roofs of Jamestown dark against the rosy sky. "There is a ship going home," said the minister. We to whom he spoke looked with him down the river, and saw a tall ship with her prow to the ocean. All her sails were set. The last rays of the sinking sun struck against her poop windows and made of them a half moon of fire. She went slowly, for the wind was light, but she went surely, away from the new land back to the old, down the stately river to the bay and the wide ocean, and to the burial at sea of one upon her. With her pearly sails and the line of flame color beneath, she looked a dwindling cloud. A little while, and she would be claimed of the distance and the dusk. "It is the George," I said. The lady who sat beside me caught her breath. "Ay, sweetheart," I went on, "she carries one for whom she waited. He has gone from out our life forever." She uttered a low cry and turned to me trembling, her lips parted, her eyes eloquent. "We will not speak of him," I said. "As if he were dead, let his name rest between us. I have another thing to tell thee, dear heart, dear court lady masking as a waiting damsel, dear ward of the king whom his majesty hath thundered against for so many weary months. Would it grieve thee to go home after all?" "Home?" she asked. "To Weyanoke? That would not grieve me." "Not to Weyanoke, but to England," I said. "The George is gone but 3 days since the Esperance came in. When she sails again, I think that we must go." She gazed at me with a whitening face. "And you," she whispered, "how will you go? In chains?" I took her clasped hands, parted them, and drew her arms around my neck. "I answered, "I will go in chains that I care not to have broken. My dear love, I think that the summer lies fair before us. Listen while I tell thee of news that the Esperance brought." While I told her of new orders from the Company to the Governor, and of my letter from Buckingham, the minister rested upon his oars that he might hear the better. When I had ceased to speak, he bent to them again, and his tireless strength sent us swiftly over the glassy water toward the town that was no longer distant. "I am more glad than I can tell you, Ralph and Jocelyn," he said, and the smile with which he spoke made his face beautiful. The light streaming to us from the ruddy west laid roses in the cheeks of the sometime ward of the king, and the low wind lifted the dark hair from her forehead. Her head was on my breast, her hand in mine. We cared not to speak, we were so happy. On her finger was her wedding ring, the ring that was only a link torn from the gold chain Prince Maurice had given me. When she saw my eyes upon it, she raised her hand and kissed the rude circlet. The hue of the sunset lingered in cloud and water, and in the pale heavens above the rose and purple shone the evening star. The cloud-like ship at which we had gazed was gone into the distance and the twilight. We saw her no more. Broad between its blackening shores stretched the James, mirroring the bloom in the west, the silver star, the lights upon the Esperance that lay between us and the town. Above her the mariners were singing, and their song of the sea floated over the water to us, sweetly and like a love song. We passed the ship unhailed, and glided on to the haven where we would be. The singing behind us died away, but the song in our hearts kept on. All things die not. While the soul lives, love lives. The song may be now gay, now plaintive, but it is deathless. This is the end of To Have and to Hold by Mary Johnston. Recording by Tom Weiss, Tom'sAudiobooks.com.